Hello? Well, everybody, can I have your attention, please? Welcome. My name is Mark Daniel, longtime member of Principals First. I'll have some very, very brief remarks after this, but we start off all Principals First events with a reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance. So I welcome you to join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So very briefly, I have two privileges today. One was to recite the pledge and lead you in the reciting of the pledge, but the other is to introduce our first speaker and our founder at Principals First, Heath Mayo. Many of you have met him, many of you have not, but once you hear him, you will see why he was able to create a grassroots organization with the spirit and the power of his voice. And Heath started this organization in, I guess it was 2019. There were, a dozen people around a table. I didn't join until a year later, but I've been involved with the group for 5 years now, and it is a fantastic organization that is growing. I mentioned the 12 people around the table when he started it. We've had our big event, many of you attended, is our annual February summit in Washington, and each year the summits kept getting bigger and bigger. This year, we broke the 1,000 mark and had about 1,200 people attending the summit. We've had great speakers and prominent speakers from all over American policymaking, and we have some great speakers tonight. But our first is Heath Mayo. Heath, come on up.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome to all of you who are here. Thank you for being with us. We are excited to be gathered like this in a room with just so many like-minded Americans at a time that I think, you're here because you sense the urgency of this moment. And tonight, more than anything, I just want you to know, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you are, we feel that too. We feel that the threats that we're seeing to the rule of law, to the judiciary, to judges, to just private practicing attorneys, which we'll hear from tonight, that those threats are threatening something that is core to who we are as Americans. And that's what we're here to do tonight, to lift up those ideas and those principles that really we believe have made America America. And it's the defense of those. It takes continually defending those principles, like from the people that you'll hear from tonight in this room, to defend them and sustain them from generation to generation. So we're just thrilled to have you here this evening. I want to thank the Yale Club for hosting us, this beautiful venue, and I want to thank all of the speakers that we will hear from this evening. But just know that you are not alone, and that if there's one thing that we want you to leave with tonight is that you have found your people. We are going to continue to organize this way, continue to meet up and talk about these principles even when it is difficult, and continue to honor those like the ones that we are going to hear from tonight, who have taken tough stands in the face of threats to themselves, to their families, and to their personal livelihood. So thank you for being with us. And without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome our first panel discussion this evening, and they can welcome them to the stage while I am telling you a little bit about them. Our first guest is Ms. Mimi Rocah, was elected as District Attorney of Westchester County, New York in November 2020. During her 4 years as DA, she modernized the DA's office, aggressively pursued gun and violent crime, developed ways to better serve crime victims, and instituted sensible criminal justice reforms. Prior to becoming DA, Ms. Rocah served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York for nearly 17 years, from 2001 to 2017. As an AUSA, she prosecuted cases involving violent crime, organized crime, human trafficking, sex trafficking, child exploitation, frauds, and public corruption. We're delighted to have her here this evening. Thank you, Mimi, for joining us. Our other guest, Mr. Preet Bharara, is a former United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, is a renowned and highly regarded lawyer who focuses on investigations and criminal litigation matters at WilmerHale. He's been dubbed one of the most consequential prosecutors in American history by The New Yorker. Mr. Bharara led some of the most significant criminal and civil litigations brought in the SDNY on behalf of the United States, leaving an indelible impact on the office while he was there. He is widely recognized as one of the most effective and transformative U.S. attorneys to ever lead the SDNY and one of the most credible voices in law enforcement. We are delighted as well to have him here. So please join me in welcoming both of our guests this evening. And we will start. I get the pleasure of moderating our discussion. So thank you both for being here. The discussion this evening, obviously, public corruption and the rule of law, two intertwined issues that obviously no shortage of things to talk about and under both of those headings. But Preet, I guess we'll start with you. I think, in the room this evening, there's certainly a lot of folks from the legal community, practitioners, folks affiliated with the ABA, but also non-practitioners, just citizens who this is important to. In recent weeks, we've obviously seen controversial executive orders issued related to the DOJ, federal prosecutions and agency enforcement. From your perspective, what stands out about these moves? Why should everyday Americans and not just lawyers be concerned about them?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks, Heath. Thanks for having us. I'm just amazed that we filled a room with people to come here, a few lawyers up on a stage. Lawyers are making a comeback, I think. There's that opinion recently with respect to the executive order against Perkins Coie, where the judge, Beryl Howell, quotes from Shakespeare, basically suggesting that it's Donald Trump's intent, metaphorically, to first kill all the lawyers. So it's good to see a lot of people without weapons here. Look, it's hard to answer that question in a brief fashion because there's been a blizzard of executive orders. There's also been a blizzard of memoranda issued by the current Attorney General Pam Bondi. I think many of them, if not all of them, and one of them is being litigated by my own firm, WilmerHale, who was the subject or target of an executive order. That a number of them are unlawful, unconstitutional, and un-American. And that third thing that I say, not just unlawful and unconstitutional, but also un-American, is important. And maybe that's the part that can resonate with lay people who are not lawyers. And it's just as important, if not more important, than the other things. So with respect to the executive orders against law firms, what I understand is hard for a layperson to comprehend is why is that such a big deal? You have these big law firms, you have these people making a lot of money. Why is that a thing that I, as an average American, have to worry about? And the reason is, with so many things that this administration does, knowing often that they're illegal and unlawful, they probably would dispute the un-American part, is that they don't care that much about the legality of what they're doing, because what they're aiming for, in my view, is a chilling effect. And the chilling effect with respect to the executive orders against law firms is we want to make sure that everyone at a prominent law firm or otherwise thinks twice, thinks 3 times before we take up a cause that is maybe adverse to the sitting president or his family or his economic interests or his cabinet officials. And that is a chilling effect that can cascade all the way down the ranks of lawyers and in other professions in a way that should offend and upset everyone. Some of the other things that they've done that are consistent with some of these executive orders are issuing questionnaires to members of the FBI agents to ask the question, remember this at the beginning, 12 years ago or 12 weeks ago? Have you had any involvement in any way, shape, or form with the January 6th investigation. And the point of that seems to me, whether it's permissible or not, is to cause every other FBI agent in the future, or DEA agent or police officer to wonder, before I serve the subpoena, or before I, in good faith, investigate this issue or case, do I need to figure out if it's in some way going to touch the President of the United States and his orbit in, however many concentric circles around the president, because that will hurt my livelihood. And so that's the damage that I think is being done by these things, separate from the things that are being argued about in court.
And Mimi, I want to go to you next on this one, because public corruption is a theme that both sides have used in differing ways, and I think the public generally, they lose sight of what it actually is and what it really means. You obviously, as Westchester DA, prosecuted at the local level corruption, public officials. How should the American people think about what constitutes public corruption? Obviously, we see meme coins going around, officials promoting their own things for their own pocketbooks. We had the Eric Adams case recently that was dropped. What is public corruption, and when do we cross the line from appropriate oversight into what people talk about as weaponization of the DOJ?
You want all that in one answer?
Just wherever you want to start.
Just kidding. I think public corruption we can most basically think about as the use of government power in some corrupt way, the abuse of government power, period. And there are so many different ways in which that can happen, financially, having conflicts of interest and using the government to enrich yourself financially. And we see that in large scales, and we've seen that. Preet has been responsible for many a case in the Southern District where individual elected officials or government officials were prosecuted for that. But it also, I think what we're seeing now, and this is where I'll try to tie together some of those other themes that you've talked about, is the takeover of the government for the personal and political enrichment of Donald Trump and his allies, many of whom are, Elon Musk, for example, but there are many others, and his family. And to me personally, obviously, as a DOJ alum for 17 years, seeing the transformation of the Department of Justice in particular into this arm of the Donald Trump, whatever you want to call company, is just heartbreaking. And the speed with which it has happened, and that is in part because of Pam Bondi, and not only her willingness to go along with it, but her absolute enjoyment of it. She does press, hits every day on Fox News and in front of the Oval Office. She was sworn in front of the White House. She was sworn in the Oval Office. They had a campaign rally in the main hall of the Great Hall of DOJ. Things that would have been unthinkable, just a few weeks ago, and now you can't even bother to comment on because there's of the flood. But what all of it ties together, and I'll definitely talk about the Adams case and what happened with SDNY, because I think that is the ultimate corruption. But all of it is really Donald Trump and his people turning the government, and specifically institutions that were revered and somewhat independent, not totally, like DOJ, into an arm of this company, essentially, illegal company that they're running and profiting from.
Can I just read one thing? I brought one prop, but it's not a prop. It's actually a memo from our Attorney General of the United States, because you're talking about memoranda and executive orders, which is not sort of concrete, the kinds of things that we talk about on cable television or in editorials, maybe a little bit. But I just want people to get a sense of the flavor of what justice seems to mean to these people who are in power now and at the head of the department that Mimi and I collectively were at for many, many, many years. This is a memorandum that was issued like a minute after she got sworn in as Attorney General. The subject is general policy regarding zealous advocacy on behalf of the United States. No problem there. First sentence, it is the job of an attorney privileged to serve in the Department of Justice to zealously defend the interests of the United States. That seems perfectly fine, too. Next sentence, those interests and the overall policy of the United States are set by the nation's chief executive, who is vested by the Constitution with all executive power. That's a red flag for folks who know something about the unitary executive theory, but not crazy yet. The discretion afforded department attorneys entrusted with those responsibilities does not include latitude to substitute personal political views or judgments for those that prevailed in the election. So this is a foundational first-day document by the Attorney General of the United States, I won't read the rest of it, that mentions the word election once and mentions the word Constitution 0 times. That's a big deal.
And it's almost a new principle where they're saying basically that the executive power includes the ability to conscript the private viewpoints of members of the DOJ, but also members of the private public now. You look at these law firms. Preet, there's a recent roundtable where I appreciated where you said basically, there's a lot that the administration is sort of throwing up against the wall with these executive orders. Many of them they might know or intend to be unconstitutional, and they might actually know and expect that they are going to lose in court. But the strategy may not be to win in court. In fact, they might win by losing and chill a bunch of constitutional activity, people exercising their rights, simply going underground because they don't want to get the light shined on them. Maybe say more about that.
Yeah, look, the Abrego-Garcia case, which has been much focused upon, I think, correctly and understandably, it's just completely unlawful, and I'll repeat the other two things, unconstitutional and un-American. And you have a conservative judge in the Fourth Circuit, Harvey Wilkinson, who writes one of the most, I think, poetic maybe is too strong a word and undermines, a rigorous opinion. But that activity, knowing it's wrong, knowing there's a judicial order against the deportation of that person to a facility that's renowned as being terrible and draconian, when you had no right to do so, whatever his status may be as a gang member or otherwise, that's a thing to be litigated later with evidence brought before a proper magistrate or judge. But the idea behind it seems to be like every other example we've given is now the world knows that if you come to this country, even if you have a judicial order preventing your deportation, even if you get asylum, it's not worth that much. And if they can reduce certain kinds of activity, if they can reduce the number of times that an FBI agent serves a subpoena on one of his business interests, or reduce the number of times that someone comes here thinking that they were going to have birthright citizenship, or reduce the number of immigrants who come here otherwise, and any one of 10 other things, then they think they have won. And that's not how the American system is supposed to work.
And, I, as was Preet, was an organized crime prosecutor for many years in SDNY. And in many ways, all of this is a shakedown. And it is intended, as Preet says, to have a chilling effect in the same way that mob bosses do. I mean, it's just a fact. It's not hyperbole to say that. They make an example out of someone, and then everybody else is scared, whether it's the law firms, whether it's the FBI, whether it's prosecutors at DOJ, and immigrants. Every single thing that they're doing and then people start doing it in advance, as I know you'll talk about in the next panel with the law firms, but not just the law firms. And so when people stand up, like in the Adams case, when prosecutors from the Southern District of New York, the interim U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon said, no, I won't do this because it is the ultimate abuse of power to try to use a criminal case, essentially, for a political deal. I mean, if you boil it down to its most basic, that's what they were trying to do. We have this criminal case. We want to make a deal with Mayor Eric Adams. We're going to we're going to tell the Southern District to drop it, whether that is something that they could represent fairly to a judge or not. And so using a criminal case for a political deal, I mean, that is against every principle that Preet ever taught me. That is against every principle that any DOJ lawyer with any shred of integrity knows. But so they tried to do it, but here, for once, and this was early on, you had not one, but I think 8 in total lawyers say, no, not me, I won't do it. And it's such a remarkable thing. I mean, the reaction, I actually did a little research, and Fox News, MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal opinion page, like across the spectrum, people were applauding Danielle Sassoon for what she did because it was so obviously just a matter of principle. And when you have a mob boss trying to shake people down and you have someone stand up and say no, it's a remarkable thing.
And can you, for the non-lawyers in the room, maybe just say a little bit about just the structure of what it is, what it means for like an AUSA like that to just resign their position after a case has been dropped? I mean, this is not something that happens every day, I presume.
No. I mean, Danielle was the most dramatic and public in the sense that she was the head of the office. So she was the one saying, no, I will not, my office will not carry out this order. I think that the prosecutors, the line prosecutors who were on the Adams case, some of whom were, I think all of them were placed on leave at some point, and all of them resigned at some point. I mean, I don't know that I've frankly ever heard of that happening before this. I can't promise that it hadn't, but because usually you would have a Department of Justice that, first of all, wouldn't ask something like this, but also would say, okay, you have a principled objection to it, someone else will handle the case. But here they just kept going through people because no one would handle it, and they won't take no for an answer because of that zealous advocacy executive order. If you don't do what we say is the law and what we say is right, then you can't have a job. And they're giving up these are people who were not ready to leave. They loved their jobs and were very much, wanted to stay. And then to pile the corruption on top of corruption, I actually thought one of the most horrible parts, not just the walking out AUSAs who had done nothing wrong, who had just worked on cases, walking them out like criminals, basically, out of the office. But then when some of them said, okay, look, we really want to stay prosecutors. This is our life. This is our job. We want to stay. Can we come back? How can we negotiate to come back? According to the last resignation letter that was written, Todd Blanche, who used to work in the Southern District of New York, said, you can come back if you admit that there was wrongdoing on the part of the Southern District in the Adams case. So, which he knows they don't believe. So not only were you trying to force an office to do something that has nothing to do with the merits of the case for a political deal, but now you're trying to get career prosecutors to say something for your own, benefit and Trump's benefit.
It's all about, to borrow a phrase that we hear a lot of, it's about bending the knee. Can I read one more sentence from that memo? I know I said I wouldn't, but just in light of what Mimi just said. And that whole memo that I'm talking about is 3 paragraphs. There's another sentence in it that says, when Department of Justice attorneys, for example, refuse to advance good faith arguments, now good faith is doing a lot of work there, good faith arguments by declining to appear in court or sign briefs, it undermines the constitutional order and deprives the president of the benefit of his lawyers. Now, when you come out of the Department of Justice, you do not ever countenance the thought of your being the president's lawyers. So it mentions the election, not the Constitution. It talks about the president's lawyers, not the public's lawyers. And that is mixed in all this stuff that Mimi has been talking about.
I want to shift gears a little bit to the overall, broader political context of these sort of legal challenges and really just the bigger value of democracy, the sustainability of the rule of law in the United States, and the way that we think about our country and what it has always represented. I think that there's a fear out there in the country that we are eroding key elements of the rule of law, the expectation that if someone brings some kind of a bogus thing against you, the courts will quickly dismiss it, and you don't have to worry if you play by the rules, and that the courts are sort of independent, that the prosecutors are independent. Trump, obviously, in recent years, has sort of, his whole thing has been an attack on sort of all of that. And at the core of that really is this argument that there's a deep state of prosecutors, right? That the prosecutors are not these principled career people committed to the rule of law, that they're really just Democratic actors or Republican actors that are looking for people they disagree with to go after them. And so he's remade his Department of Justice in that image. Have we lost what we thought we had, I guess? Are you concerned that we're teetering, or are we really close to a real crisis?
You're looking directly at me. I would say teetering. Look, it's a difficult thing to deal with all this stuff. This is an indirect answer to your question, to the extent that part of your question was, how are we doing? How are we fighting back? And one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be here is this is a nonpartisan effort. There, as you said in your introductory remarks, you welcome Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And so we've been sitting here 10, 15, 20 minutes. I don't think there's any issue that we have discussed and talked about that is partisan or ideologically left or right. We're talking about basic constitutional stuff. We're talking about basic rule of law stuff that someone on the left, on the court or otherwise, would say, you can't deport that guy because there's an order saying you can't deport that guy. And super conservative people like Michael Ludig, who was a judge on a circuit court, and a sitting judge, Judge Wilkinson, and even other folks in the public sphere like Joe Rogan, I don't think he was a judge, agree on the same thing.
Even
right?
the Supreme Court.
Even the Supreme Court. So just as a nod to you, Heath, and this organization, it is a wonderful thing to see people come together and talk about that on which we can agree as fundamental rule of law principles for the country. I keep mentioning Abrego Garcia, and what's heartening about that, the silver lining in that thing, is that my guess is that the Trump administration didn't think anybody would actually give a damn about someone who they characterize without a lot of evidence, other than doctored evidence in a photo of his tattoo, that they characterize as being a member of a gang, right? The fact that people all across the political spectrum are like, wait a minute, there but for the grace of God go I, is really heartening to me. There's not a lot that's heartening, but the fact that has become a symbol of overreach on the part of the administration. Somebody about whom Judge Wilkinson even said, that the administration says he's a terrorist and a gang member. And then to me, I've said this on the podcast a couple of times, the most important sentence in that opinion to me is, after he recites the allegation, perhaps not, right? And everybody in the United States of America, left, right, or center, or some combination of those things, has to believe in the role of evidence, right, and facts, not just in news reporting, but also not just in science, but also in how we deal with rule of law principles. And the fact that so many people are galvanized about this guy, who I have no idea, maybe he's a terrible guy. I'm not vouching for him, but you got to do it the right way. And I think that's an important thing that you're doing here.
And one more question, then I want to open it for audience questions. So be thinking if you have a question, we'll come to it next. Mimi, I want to close with you here, because I think it comes down to, I I don't think, it doesn't seem like people have a problem with how prosecutors do sort of a lot of the day-to-day work. It's not in the news, but that's some of the most important stuff you do. You keep the, drug traffickers off the street, the sex predators, you go after all those folks. But the issue of public debate really is the skepticism about how prosecutors deal with political actors or public officials. And in many cases, the public officials are the most corrupt ones that deserve prosecution. Give people a sense of how those prosecuting decisions work internally, where you have a sense that we can get an indictment on this person, or they're a political actor. Does the Justice Department, do local prosecution offices, do they approach each person equally, or are there actual protections where you tick and tie every box before you go indict a sitting public official?
Okay, so in my experience, which is what I can talk to, both in the Southern District and in the DA's office when I was running it, everyone is approached the same, except that you maybe even have you do have a higher threshold if you're charging someone in the public eye. I mean, so it's the opposite of weaponization. I think there's sort of, it's beyond a reasonable doubt plus. In DOJ, at least it used to be, I don't know what it is now, that there were lots of special permissions and hoops you had to go through, as Preet well knows, to charge a public official. In the DA's office, I was the hoop that they had to jump through, but it did not, and I will tell you, people in my office were surprised that I didn't care if it was a Democrat or Republican, because I do think in some state offices, it's different, and maybe they do care because those are elected prosecutors. That's a whole other topic that we could get into, but I actually think in federal offices, it's more insulated and you have more independence because the people doing the charging are never running for election. They're not beholden to their party. I mean, sure, they're appointed by a party, nominated, but they don't need the party, so to speak, in the way that elected prosecutors do. But the other point I want to make about this whole weaponization thing, and you and I have talked to Heath about the word weaponization, I don't mind it in this context, but out there in the world, it's so, everybody can weaponize the word. You're weaponizing. No, you're weaponizing. And the question is, who is abusing the power? I mean, I keep coming back to that. Who is not perfect, who is not, it doesn't mean that the Biden DOJ always got it right, and it doesn't mean that you have to like every prosecution that came out of it or agree with every prosecution that came out of it. There are lots of things I could criticize about that. But the question is whose intent was to try and apply this standard of justice and rules at least somewhat even-handedly versus just using it for retribution and your own personal purposes. And this is not new. I mean, Trump started doing this when he was running in 2015 and 16. I vividly remember in his first term, him standing out there. It was like when I decided to go on TV because I heard him standing there going after the FBI and calling it the deep state, and everyone was out to get him. And so the discrediting of the Department of Justice and the FBI and all government institutions started long, long ago, and it worked, frankly. And that's part of how we got here. And I think a lot of what people like you all who are here for one reason, because you believe in democracy and institutions to some degree, even if they're imperfect, what we have to do is rebuild the faith in them, which is really hard to do.
Thank you, both. We'll go to questions now. Audience, anybody have questions? Yeah, right there. I'll just repeat the question for the audience. Basically, getting back to the teetering point that Preet was mentioning. Question is, how likely are we to see the administration defy a court order and trigger a constitutional crisis? Curious what you
I don't know. That's a tough prediction to make. I think ordinarily the party that blinks would be the non-judicial party. I'm going to go back to the same case I've been mentioning because it's a sort of a great test for all these principles, Abrego Garcia, right? And that went up the chain of the courts, and the Trump administration was directed to facilitate his return, not effectuate his return, and the differences are difficult to understand, but to facilitate his return. And the Trump administration, at least then, which is why I say teetering, not over yet, the Trump administration did not say, F you, we're not going to facilitate anything. They said, well, we think what facilitate means is this minimal stuff. Like, if you can get here, if you can swim across the ocean, if you can swim across the Gulf of America, then we'll take care of him. And it may not be a distinction that carries a lot of weight in a cynical person's head or even a non-cynical person's head. But there's a difference between being clever and saying, we interpret your thing as meaning this, and not saying we're defying it. I still hold out hope given the fact that I understand in other contexts that this president does blink. Tariffs are a good example. That he will blink at the idea of doing that thing that is not just reinterpreting what has been ordered, but say, we hear what you're saying, here's our middle finger. If that happens, I'll let my good friend and colleague, former colleague, Rocah says what happens then, but I think it's very, very bad. But I don't think we're there yet. So the people who say we're in again, it's a semantic question. We are definitely in some kind of crisis, but we are not yet in a crisis in which there is a direct, indisputable, 100% clear, absolute defiance of a court order. I still think, for various reasons, that won't happen. And one reason is, and I think you were saying this, his overall popularity is at risk. You have the United States Attorney interim, who I think was a joke and a fiasco, Ed Martin, in D.C., whose nomination was scuttled because a Republican senator, not a liberal, Tom Tillis, said, I'm not voting for that guy. So you see cracks on the right on these kinds of things, and I mentioned already the conservatives who are in support of what the rule of law means for Abrego Garcia. So I hope and pray that there'll be a blink before we get there.
And sorry, I meant to make this point earlier. I'm sure people here know it, but the people in the SDNY, the most high-profile resignations came from Danielle Sassoon and Hagen Skadden, both of whom are credentialed conservatives. I mean, credentialed, like stars of the Federalist Society. And, I'll leave it at that. So just in terms of the cracks there. And to add to what Preet said, why we're teetering, why we're in the thumbing your nose phase, not the outright, I'm defying you and I'm saying I'm defying you. Judge Rodriguez, right, in Texas, also a credentialed Federalist Society conservative judge, certified a class of people who were about to be deported, and which was kind of unusual in and of itself for him to certify them as a class of habeas petitioners. That's kind of unusual, and said nobody's going anywhere in Texas, at least in his district. And so far, that has held, right? I mean, they haven't, that I know of, defied that. And that's something. I mean, our bar is really low, but that's something. So I don't know the answer to what happens when they go from thumbing your nose to outright defiance. I don't think anybody knows, and I've heard every legal commentator dodge that question, so I'm going to join that one.
And to the point of that he blinks and there are cracks forming, I mean, a lot of people come to the principle of first events, one of the biggest things that we hear is, what can we do? What can we do? How can we make a difference? How can we move the needle in this moment? I think those cracks, him standing down on Ed Martin today, show that stuff like this makes a difference. I mean, when you come together, you see these protests in the streets, the hands-off things. We don't have to wait until the next election to make our voices heard in this way. And when you gather in numbers like this in people's districts, we've done this around the country. We were in Dallas, we were in Chicago. When you gather in numbers in person like this, when you show up, it gets on the radar of these politicians. Whether it's a Democrat or Republican, this can make a difference. So thank you for being here today. This is part of forming those cracks. Well, I think we've got time for like a little bit, yeah. We'll do a quick lightning round, and then we'll sort of respond to them, seriate them, and how we get them.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'll just say, you mentioned Trump's meme coins up front. Seems like the richest soil for corruption going on right now, and I feel like we're all just sort of seeing it and shrugging our shoulders. What should be happening to make sure that we're not using technology to bribe the president?
Right. Good question. That's one.
What do you think the likelihood of some of these federal judges, whether it's Beryl Howell or anyone else, actually holding administration people in contempt, and what do you think the pros and cons of doing that are?
Okay. And maybe one more so that we don't forget them. Or we'll do. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I guess, I don't know if the last one, but I guess everything you guys have said makes me think that in reality, this is a political problem fundamentally, because you keep talking about support for either him or whoever else it is. I used to listen to your podcast years ago, and so to me it comes back to the media and media fragmentation and getting people to actually think along the lines of how everyone here is thinking. So what are your ideas to fix that?
Can I answer that last one first? Because
Sure.
it's the only one I remember. At this age, I'm not like, that question was like 100 hours ago. I think that's a very bright and smart point. It is all political. And I have always said, I know Mimi agrees with me, and we spend our lives in law enforcement, that you're not going to have Deus Ex Machina falling from the heaven, whether it's Bob Mueller or Jack Smith or anyone else, to do the political thing that you want done. The way that you make a politician blink, right, is to cause the politician to not be able to get the agenda done and to lose support, right? The reason why Nixon is different from Trump is because with Nixon, Republican senators said, you got to go, and he went. The reason Republican senators aren't doing that with Trump is because they fear Trump more than they fear their voters, right? And so ultimately, and you have to be careful how you say this, because I don't want to make, disparaging statements about the people, but the people absolutely 100% have the power to topple policies that are terrible and the president himself. All it takes is people in districts where Republicans and moderates feel that if they don't support Trump, they're gone, like Liz Cheney. If you can change that and have their constituents feel like, oh my gosh, if you stand up for this stuff and the war against the rule of law and all that, we're going to kick you out then. And if you put those folks between a rock and a hard place, and they realize that supporting some crazy policy, an un-American policy, an unpatriotic policy, is the thing that puts them in jeopardy, changes the entire calculus. It changes everything. So I think you're right. It is ultimately all about people at the ballot box.
And then I think it was meme coin, likelihood of a contempt order, and then this question of when defying the return of Abrego Garcia results in sort of the FU that you say we haven't quite seen yet. I don't know who wants to take the rest of that menu.
I guess, okay, I tried to avoid the contempt question before, but we keep coming back to it. I mean, I think, this is not a prediction, but I'm just trying to seeing how things have played out so far. It seems to me that the courts, conservative, liberal, whatever, judges, district courts, circuit courts, are kind of doing this dance where they are all but saying you're in contempt. I mean, Judge, blanking on his name, Boasberg, thank you, did it like explicitly. He said, I found probable cause to find that you're in contempt, but didn't hold them in contempt. And the other courts and judges are doing it a little less definitively than that and saying, I find this to be disingenuous, you saying that you didn't know and didn't think this was a real order, or the fact that you, immigration lawyer from DOJ, don't know anything. I'm very upset about that, and this is unacceptable, and I've never seen that. But not saying you administration are in contempt for showing up and not being able to present any facts or even make arguments. Judge Rodriguez, in his opinion, says you didn't even try to argue, really, that this was an invasion. You didn't even allege the facts. So, but I think that, there's almost like they're all watching each other, the judges. And I do think they're, and I'll say I'm proud of the judiciary so far for seemingly upholding the rule of law as best it can, mostly, and putting roadblocks and kind of watching each other and taking strength from each other, and also watching what the Supreme Court is doing, right? Judge Rodriguez cited to the Supreme Court, who hasn't ruled on any merits, but they did do that 1 a.m. emergency order, which shows everybody shows that they do not trust the administration, at least 7 of them. And all 9 of them at one point did say due process, like everybody gets due process. What that means, we don't know. So I think that there is this, maybe, I can't speak for the judges, but it almost seems like they're, taking strength from each other and hoping that ultimately, when this goes to the Supreme Court, which when I say it, I mean everything we're talking about that the Supreme Court, or at least a majority of them, will say no, and that the Trump administration will listen. I mean, I don't want to put all my eggs in the Supreme Court basket, but so far they've been stronger than or they've done more than I had hoped for or thought. And again, I see these judges all kind of watching each other and feeding off of each other in a good way. So I think I dodged the question again, but I think they're dodging it, right? And I don't mean that negatively. I think they're doing a dance, they're tiptoeing, and they're trying to find ways to remedy this situation without having, because I think holding the administration, I just think that's kind of pointless, frankly. I don't know what that's going to do. I think it just makes them look like victims and I'm not saying they shouldn't, but contempt is an extreme measure for anyone. I mean, any litigant. I don't think judges, use it freely anyway.
There is at this moment court battles going on where it's, Trump 0 and the opposition on many of these seminal cases we've been talking about won, like they're winning. But there's also this rhetorical battle going on in the public square and the court of public opinion that is crazy to me. At the risk of saying this at this club that is, founded by alumni of a particular university, I believe the Vice President of the United States went to a very highly rated law school, and he says on this question, and he knows better, he says this is a gaslighting by a really smart guy, a really smart lawyer, educated at a fine institution, I believe. And he says a judge has no business interpreting what invasion means, or this is the Alien Enemies Act, right, on the Venezuelans, that the president has certain powers of deportation that can bypass due process if there is an invasion or a predatory incursion. And J.D. Vance stands up and says to the American people, a judge has no business figuring that out or opining on that, interpreting that, which is complete and total, absolute nonsense, and he knows it. So on this question that I'm also avoiding about what happens when that clash happens, I think it depends, going back to your point, it depends on what the majority of the folks think is the right argument and appreciates they're being gaslit. I mean, just to put it in perspective for a moment, obviously the president has wide berth on foreign policy and national security. I believe that, right? And lots of Democrats who served in Democratic administrations believe that. But what words in a statute mean, that's the province of the judge. So for example, if a judge has no right or ability or authority to limit what invasion means, I put this example to two constitutional scholars in recent days on my podcast. Isn't it then true that the sitting president of the United States can decide colloquially, you know what, we have a lot of imports from Japan. The Japanese imports are invading our country, and you know what, it's a predatory incursion because it's lowering manufacturing jobs in the United States, and it's doing all sorts of bad economic harm. We have a war on drugs. We have a war on the invasion of imports. I'm not going to now summarily deport Germans and Japanese from this country. That's what that would mean. And the more people understand how much BS is going on in this rhetorical debate, as between the administration and the courts, the better.
That hypothetical that you just spit out, I just believe in my bones, basically, that the legal advisors that are around Trump, that's how they think about they're thinking, how can we just kind of come up with a way to say that this is somehow grounded in the law, or just fashion an argument that this is somehow an incursion or an invasion, and then we can kind of do whatever we want.
Just one other sign, by the way, is it's actually the government's table at some of these arguments. It's a lonely table. It's like one guy, right? He read the memo. Is like, I guess I can make a good faith argument. I mean, think about the reason why you have to issue the memo that I've read from a couple of times. It's to scare people into making arguments that they know are against the Constitution, against the law, and my phrase, not coined it, but un-American, right? So, it's the public, it's the political point, but also if you get enough people, and Mimi spoke eloquently about this with respect to certain people in the Southern District, if people are like, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to make that argument, that makes a difference too.
And just on the meme quote, because I got to hit it before we close, that to me, that's the most corrupt thing that I think I've ever seen from public official. These guys were the same ones that were about to string Hunter Biden up in the town square for his $50,000 paint. And by the way, I don't think Hunter Biden has $50,000 paintings that he could sell either. But here's a guy from the official account tweeting out a meme coin the day after every member of his family tweeting out a meme coin who the initial purchasers were all sort of, it sounds like foreign purchasers that made a bunch of money, and then all the retail investors who were like, my president says I need to, they obviously got the rug pulled out from under them. I mean, this is, you can't find a better case of corruption. And of course it's meme coin, it's not traceable, so who knows how it is actually, who knows if we'll ever know who made money on this stuff. But to me, this is just, it's the best example of both how Trump thinks about the spoils of public office, but also just how corrupt that has become, and how they can excuse, like, this is what comes with power. I just think that the hypocrisy around that is just absurd. But in any case, maybe we will leave it there. Thank you both. This has been a fantastic discussion.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you both for being here. And we will now welcome to the stage the folks who will be presenting the next award. Thank you so much, Mimi. Thank you so much.
Good evening, and just thanks to everyone again for being here today. I think it is very inspiring to see so many people who are here to support the rule of law. So thank you to everyone who's here. In the aftermath of the Civil War, U.S. Representative Will Kelly from Philadelphia and a friend of President Lincoln observed that these are terrible times for timid people. In many ways, our current state of affairs feels unprecedented, but the present moment is also a terrible time for timid people. We are about to hear from two people who are the antithesis of timid, Brenna Trout Frey and Sam Wong, two of the associates who resigned from law firms that were targeted by the Trump administration's executive orders. To paraphrase Judge Howell from the D.C. Circuit in a recent decision regarding the illegality of these executive orders, she said, "If the founding history of this country is any guide, those who stood up to vindicate constitutional rights, and by doing so, served to promote the rule of law, will be the models lauded when the period of American history is written." We agree with Judge Howell. The actions taken by individuals like Brenna and Sam and several of their colleagues who couldn't be here today, Rachel Cohen, Andrew Silberstein, Sunik Muradian, and Jackie Pittman, we know they'll be lauded by the history books. Tonight, we are proud to award each of them with the inaugural Principles First Beacon Award, which is given for individual courage, integrity, and principled leadership. As you all can see, the Principles First logo is a lighthouse. Throughout history, these iconic structures have served not just as beacons of light, but as pillars of strength that stand tall and help to guide us all through treacherous times. We are honored to have Brenna and Sam here this evening and to also accept this award on behalf of the associates who could not be here in person tonight. But most of all, we are thankful for their embodiment of the courage, integrity, and principled leadership that is so badly needed in our country and especially in the legal profession right now. So we'd like to invite Brenna and Sam up to the stage, please.
Thank you for having us here tonight. We accept this award on behalf of our fellow attorneys Rachel Cohen, Andrew Silberstein, Jackie Pittman, and Sunik Muradian. We also accept these awards not just in our individual capacities, but in support of two important principles that led to our decisions. The first is that the rule of law matters. Lawyers and law firms have an obligation to uphold this principle, but so do members of Congress, those serving in the executive branch, and all citizens of this country who enjoy a functioning democracy. Now is an inflection point when we all must make a decision to defend the rule of law if we want it to continue. The second principle is that everyone needs to determine their line in the sand as our country strays from the democratic principles undergirding our democracy. For myself, determining what my line in the sand was in advance, my employer's capitulation to the unlawful and unconstitutional demands of an unrestrained executive branch, allowed me to act quickly and decisively when that line in the sand was reached. I encourage everyone, if you have not already, to consider what your own personal line in the sand will be, so that you too will be able to act quickly and decisively if and when the time comes. We thank Principles First for this award, and we thank you all for inviting us to join you tonight. Recently, we have learned how fragile our democracy truly is and what it will take to protect it. One necessity is bipartisan cooperation amongst individuals who act not out of blind loyalty to their political party, but out of adherence to a set of collective principles and love of their country. This group is doing the important work to facilitate that cooperation, and we thank you for it.
to lead our next panel, where we're going to hear more from our award recipients, I would like to introduce Professor Rick Pildes, who is a constitutional law professor at New York University School of Law. Professor Pildes is one of the nation's leading scholars of constitutional law concerning democracy. He is a former law clerk to Justice Thurgood Marshall. He has been elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Law Institute, and has also received recognition as a Guggenheim Fellow and Carnegie Scholar. We're honored that he is here with us tonight, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you very much. So I'm honored to be here. I always like to work with organizations that are bipartisan or nonpartisan on these kinds of issues. It's incredibly important, and the work that organizations like Principle First are doing is some of the most important work, I think, going on right now in the country. I'm also, of course, very honored to be on a panel with two such morally weighty people as the two people who are on the stage here now. So let me start the conversation. Maybe Sam, if I can come to you first. I want to ask you about the decision you made to leave your law firm. How difficult was the decision? Who did you talk to about making the decision? I think Brenna has already said a little bit about her process, but I want to hear about your process.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all for having me here. It was a very difficult decision and a very easy decision all at once. It was difficult because Latham, the law firm I was at, had become my home. I was there for only a little bit less than 2 years, but as an associate at one of these firms, you spend almost every waking minute pouring yourself into the work that you're doing. I was an energy regulatory associate. I loved the team I worked with. I loved the work that I did. I had great friends at the firm. And making the choice to leave all that behind was very difficult. Our firm had said that they'd given us an opportunity to have a meeting before they made the deal in the DC office, and I spoke up at that meeting and said, you know, on behalf of myself and other associates, if you make a deal, I'll quit. And then the next day, the firm made a deal, and I was like, oh, shit, I guess I'm quitting. Which I was fine with, but you know, the day after the firm made a deal, I spent some of the day crying, thinking about leaving the firm, and then I spent the next day. I was like, okay, I'm fine with leaving. Now I'm gonna have to come to terms with like leaving the home that I had built for the 2 years I was there, and that was like a whole other thing to deal with. But at the same time, it was quite an easy choice. There's no way I could have stayed and spent all of my waking hours working for a firm that had made a deal. So yeah, it was very easy and very hard all at once.
Can I ask you also? Yeah, it's very moving to hear your personal account. How did the lawyers you worked with at the firm react?
Those who have reached out to me have all been very, very positive. I think no one at the firm is happy that we made a deal. I'm sure the executive committee is not happy that we made a deal. It's a tough spot to be in for sure. So I had a lot of people reach out to me. I think a lot of people want to do what I did, but it's difficult. Not everyone can quit on a dime. People have families and massive student loans or people they support. There's a lot of job insecurity right now, especially in DC, as the federal workforce has been slashed. So it's very scary. And I think people are happy to have someone who is able to speak out, and people have been very supportive.
And Brenna, you've already landed with a new firm, a firm headed by Abby Lowell, just created, very well-known criminal defense lawyer. Did you interview with a number of firms after you made your decision? I'm curious, I'm gonna ask both of you, to the extent you did talk to a number of firms, what kind of reactions were you getting after you had left and started looking for new employment?
I'm laughing because I did not interview with any firms. So after I quit, I was planning to maybe take a little time off from the practice of law. But I was lucky enough through the process of it becoming kind of a viral thing when I quit, to be put in contact with a lot of like-minded people. And I was introduced to Abby, and he had been thinking about the idea of making this smaller firm where you could take on cases without having to run it by the entirety of the firm. People who work at big law firms know that it can be really difficult to get a case approved. It can be conflicted out if the firm represents other organizations or companies in conflict. And right now, those big firms are really scared to do anything that might upset the executive branch of the Trump administration. And so Abby was interested in making this smaller firm where we could kind of more nimbly take on these cases as these novel legal issues arise and represent clients who have been unfairly targeted by the Trump administration. And unfortunately for us, we have a lot of clients and potential clients already. And so that was kind of the process by which I came to be at Abby's firm.
And Sam, have you been interviewing for jobs? Are you taking a break? And if you've been interviewing, do you get asked about this during the interviews? How have other firms responded?
Yeah, well, a little more than a month ago, I guess I quit about a month ago. It feels like 5 lifetimes ago now. I was not expecting to not have a job a month and a half ago. So at the moment I quit and I walked out of the building, I was like, oh my God, now what? Like I had come to terms with the quitting part, with quitting publicly, but then I hadn't really thought about what that actually means once you walk out the door and you don't have your work phone or computer anymore. So I thought I was going to take some time, and then I also came to terms with my type A personality, which has not let me relax. So I've applied to some other firms. Luckily, there's a nice list of firms that have not capitulated and have taken a stand, those who have signed on to the Perkins brief or are fighting EOs. But I work in a highly niche practice of energy regulatory work. So there's some 500 firms on that list. Only about 5 or 6 have energy regulatory practices. So I've been in conversations with some of those firms, and I'm going through the process. But it's a tough market, and I leapt hoping for the best, but it still remains to be determined.
I mean, I'm curious, do they ask you specifically about your decision to quit, or do they not want to say anything about that? Do they open that up? I didn't bring it up, and they haven't necessarily brought it up either, but I think it sort of precedes the conversation. When you publicly quit your firm and send an email to the thousands of attorneys at the firm and then post it to LinkedIn and it gets sent around and it's on news articles, I think there's not much that needs to be said after that. I think if they're interviewing me, they know what I've done, and I'm happy to field questions. And they haven't asked directly, but people I've spoken to in their individual capacity at the firms that are fighting have thanked me.
I feel like it's a self-limiting group. If you don't want to work anywhere where the people are going to be concerned by that, so it's not really a difficult thing to put out there.
Right, I'm not applying to work at Kirkland. It's, yeah.
So, Brenna, you said something about this in your comments earlier, but I wanted to ask it and give you a chance to say more, and then also Sam. What would you say to lawyers, particularly younger lawyers who are out there who are struggling with these issues, maybe at a firm that hasn't yet been swept up into any of this, maybe a firm that has been, but what advice would you give to lawyers, particularly younger lawyers, in this moment?
I think I would first remind young attorneys that when you take your oath to be a member of the bar, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And your firm doesn't take an oath. it's the members of the firm who need to uphold that commitment. And it can feel really disconnected, especially when you're a younger attorney. You feel like you have no power as a member of a large firm, but you have to remember that you do have power, you are an attorney, and you have upheld an oath. And I don't discount the difficult nature of the decisions that you have to make when your firm makes decisions that you don't like, but I think, you can make decisions that might make your life easy, but it might make your children's lives very hard. And you have to remember that, I think, when you're considering what to do next.
Before you answer, I just want to point out, I learned tonight that Brenna is an NYU law graduate, so I take
We have that
particular
connection.
pleasure in being up here with her, although she was not a student of mine. Anyway, Sam, what would you say to people in your position? at
My
various-
non-NYU response.
Where'd you go to law school?
I was at Penn, so
Well, that's
still
too
not
bad,
Yale, but no, I think what Brenna said in the remarks was absolutely correct. The first question or step is, where is your line in the sand? And I don't think any of us who have publicly quit have ever wanted to shame anybody who stays. It's an incredibly personal decision. People have asked me, should I quit? What do I do? I cannot tell anyone else what to do. That's something that you have to look at based off of your context and your personal situation and your morals and say, maybe my line in the sand is actually 2 steps further than yours, and that's fine. Everyone in this room can have different morals and lines in the sand, but it's important to know what that line is. And then the second question is, when that line is crossed, what are you going to do about it? You also don't have to quit. It's a really strong statement to quit, one that I stand by wholeheartedly. I have no regrets about it, but not everybody can do it, even when the lines in the sand have been crossed. And the question then is, what are you going to do when your line has been crossed? If you can't quit, what can you do? You still have a voice. You're still within a powerful institution. Can you speak up within the firm? Can you speak up outside of the firm? Or if you're not at a firm, what are you going to do?
I think one of the things that can be really helpful to remember, so these deals that were made by the firms, a key component of that is that the firms agreed to provide millions of dollars of pro bono services to, it was very vaguely defined as organizations and individuals that both the firm and the administration supported. And we've seen in the coming days that actually was, as everyone knew what happened, that wasn't the case. Like, there are some cases that are being asked to be taken on by the Trump administration by these big firms that, maybe the lawyers within them would not have chosen to take on. I think young attorneys need to remember that usually when you're at a large law firm, you get to choose the pro bono cases that you take on. Those aren't assigned to you. And so I think that's an example of one step you can take that's not quitting, is to not take on these pro bono representations with which you morally disagree on behalf of the law firm, because we know that's the next step down the line. We know that's where this is heading.
Yes, I think that many of the law firms who did make these deals believe that they will be able to control the pro bono work that they'll be doing, so they've just made this pledge. And you have to imagine there's going to be conflict with the administration when we get down to the specifics about which representation, which individuals, which clients, which causes. So if they think that they're out of the water on this, and they probably don't, but certainly they are telling themselves, I think, that we'll still control the pro bono work we do. These are very broad areas. We can find things to do in these areas that we're comfortable doing, and we'll see how long that holds up.
I mean, I think that's already been shown that that's not the case. There are reports of some of the law firms being asked to take on representation of police accused of brutality. There have been some anti-transgender representations that the firms have been asked to take on by the government. And it's irrelevant what the cause is. It's the federal government, the presidential administration telling these private law firms, we want you to take on these representations that we have thought of. And I mean, that's just really unheard of.
I'm wondering what both of you think at this point, and it's still early on in all of this for both of you, but what's your sense of lawyers, the role of lawyers, the profession? Has it been strengthened through all of this process? Has it been weakened? You've been through very, very difficult decisions about your conception of the lawyer, the role of the lawyer, the role of the law. I'm curious kind of how you reflect on that. Maybe Sam, if I can ask you first.
Yeah. In many ways, I don't know. I'm just a former second-year associate, 2 years out of law school, not expecting to be sitting up here opining on the rule of law.
Is this your first public appearance since you?
Yeah. So it's my first public appearance ever. I just sat on my computer typing about electric authority, so it's a little different. But I think in the, if I'm going to opine, I think in the micro and the individual level, many of us feel strengthened. Like I have been catapulted into something I hadn't expected. And many of my friends, I think, similarly feel emboldened, though are acting in different ways. But in the macro and the larger scale, the attack on the rule of law is really frightening. And the Trump administration, I don't want to say, is doing a good job, but they are taking effect on all of us as lawyers, as people. It's scary. I mean, I think about what is happening with the rule of law, and as I'm 33, I'd never had to really think about these things before. I grew up in a society that I never had to question civil liberties being taken away or freedom of speech. And these are things I kind of just let wash over me. Words like democracy and freedom and liberty, I just was like, okay, these are great words, They kind of have lost their effect on me over time, but now they're being threatened. When you really think about it, these words are actual meaningful things. You can't see them in front of you, but the rule of law is the thing that holds us all together. That stops me from disagreeing with someone else in the room and pushing them down a flight of stairs because I don't want to go to jail. But when you get rid of the rule of law, you bring chaos and fear into society. So what's happening against the rule of law is very scary, and it's scary as an individual to speak out. Like I was scared to speak out publicly, but I also spoke out publicly because I was scared. We do these things because we have to. So it's scary on a personal level, but many of us are emboldened.
Brenna, what's your sort of perspective at this stage of things about law, about the role of the lawyer, about the whole profession?
I think I remain optimistic. I mean, I think I have to. I have young children. I want to be optimistic. I feel hopeful at this new law firm that I'm at, Lowell & Associates. We've partnered with a lot of fantastic lawyers who are really in the trenches fighting these attacks on the rule of law, and we've worked really hard to join that fight. One of our first clients is New York AG Tish James, and they just announced today that she's under FBI investigation, and it makes me feel energized that we're able to be on the front lines of this fight. And I think that all lawyers need to think about kind of what piece they can take, even if this is not their area of expertise. Like, how can you get involved in defending the rule of law? And I mean, that's not just for lawyers, that's for everyone. Everyone needs to think about the way in which they can meet this moment?
You know, reacting to Sam's comments in part, one of the things that I have been saying to my students over this semester is, you know, many of you have come in kind of cynical about things like the rule of law or the independent judiciary. And in these moments of stress, you actually begin to realize how fundamental these institutions are, these values are. And I think you said it beautifully, actually, in your comments. You know, I think all of us at some point kind of wonder what would we do under whatever terrible circumstances might confront us in terms of the larger political, social kind of world. Sometimes people are lucky and you never actually have to be tested or meet that moment. But we are all now in a position where, you know, the moment is here and all of us are being tested in various sorts of ways. Certainly in the academy, we're very much aware of the moment. But you two have both obviously risen to the occasion, and it's just a wonderful treat to be able to hear both of you speak about your experiences and what you represent is so compelling. And so I wanted to thank you, as I'm sure everybody else here does, for speaking up, for standing up, for being here tonight, especially Sam, for your first public appearance on these issues.
A non-NYU law grad.
Well, you know, we offer masters in law, so there's still hope. But anyway, thank you both very, very much.
And with that, please join me in thanking all of our guests this evening. That was just a delight to have all of them here this evening. And feel free, I think we've got the room until like a little bit longer, so if you want to stay and continue the conversation, feel free. I just want to say again, thank you for being here. This was just a fantastic evening to see all of you here with us. You know, we're a grassroots group, completely volunteer run. I mean, everything from the backdrop to the summit that we host in DC, it's just kind of grassroots energy volunteers from around the state. I want to thank our state leadership team. If you're a part of the state leadership team that helped kind of put this on, the volunteer group, please stand up and be recognized. These folks, they have day jobs and they give up time on Zoom calls during the week to get these things off the ground. So if you're interested in being a part of Principles First, find one of them, come up to us, let us know. You're on our list now since you signed up, so you'll get our emails and you'll hear about events like this that we host. We want to keep hosting them here in New York. You know, there's a lot of folks that are like-minded out there, and it takes leaders like Brenna and Sam and Preet and Mimi standing up and being vocal about these things, and it's good to have a crowd of people assembled so that not just the people in this room, but everybody out there in the country can see that there is actually a well of support for the people that are making these tough decisions at a time like this, because I fundamentally believe that this is who the country is. The country is leaders like the ones you heard from today. That's the character of America. That's what we believe in. And if we keep plugging away and coming together like this, courage begets courage. So I want to thank you guys for your courage. I know it will beget more courage. And with that, thank you very much. That concludes the evening. Thanks for coming.